Hi everyone, welcome back to Byte Marx. And joining us today is Chad. Say hello, Chad.
Hey everybody, how's it going?
Yeah, if Chad is back, then that must mean we're talking about Korea. uh, no, I joke. We could also be talking about cricket. Uh, for all two of the people in the audience who would appreciate to talk about cricket. I'm
Shots
sorry.
fired.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Chad, but most of the audience is not from a cricket-speaking, cricket-playing country, shall I say? But yeah,
Oh, no problem.
we are back. We're here to talk about something that has just been blowing up online, and it has to be Squid Game. We're definitely going to be talking about Squid Game today. So yeah, let's get into it. We have a lot to talk about. We're not going to be doing a recap of the entire series. The purpose of this episode is to talk about some things that have been on our minds, to get Chad's perspective as both, a person who has lived in Korea for quite a while, and also, in some respects, actually had a perspective into the Korean society that maybe other people might have not. To just see where this podcast takes us. Is that good with you, Chad?
Yeah, 100%. Let's do it.
Right. So let's obviously you have to start off with a summary for all two people who haven't seen Squid Game yet. Squid Game is a hit Netflix production. It is the brainchild of, and you're going to have to correct my pronunciation, Hwang Dong-hyuk. Hyuk?
Hyuk,
Hyuk.
you're good. Yeah.
Hwang Dong-hyuk. Who is a South Korean director, and this has exploded in terms of popularity. I think at the time of recording, it has like almost $900 million in revenue for Netflix. It's the most popular show basically on the platform. And it's a weird one because in a lot of ways, Squid Game is a very progressive show. And it's the kind of show that the kinds of people who run Netflix would probably be watching if they were, if it existed in real life. A CEO is much more likely to watch an actual Squid Game than they are to watch the Squid Game TV show, that's for sure. And a brief summary of Squid Game is that it's the story about a man, an impoverished man, called Song Ji-hoon, right?
Yep,
Who
Yihuna.
I will be referring to as Ji-hoon for the rest of the episode. And Ji-hoon is not a well-off man. He is drowning in debt. He owes money to loan sharks. He owes money to presumably banks. He's not doing well. He lives with his mother, who also is kind of poor. And facing all of these rising money problems, Ji-hoon decides to listen to a very well-dressed salesman to participate in something called in something which is ostensibly just referred to as a game or the games. I don't think they actually refer to it as the Squid Game on the TV show, but that's what we will be calling the broad sort of thing going forward. These games are basically they're 6 games, and they're mostly based on children's games that were popular in South Korea. One of which, of course, is the eponymous Squid Game, which is a very strange game. When it was first described to me, I was like, "What is going on here? I don't understand the rules." Because I'm familiar with stuff like hand tennis and those kinds of things. South Korean kids games are a little bit more sophisticated. But the catch with Squid Game is, of course, that it's literally life or death. So there are a number of players, about 436, that are at the start, and they compete in these games. And if you get eliminated, you get eliminated in real life. So basically, you get killed in kind of brutal ways. Squid Game is very creative about how it depicts violence, and that's both a pro and con, depending on who you ask. And why are they doing this? Well, they're competing for 55 billion won, which is about $38 million, or for our South African viewers, 581 billion rand, which is, that's a lot of money.
Decent amount of money.
Yeah, the people who do this game need money, and they are definitely going to get a payout if they manage to win. Emphasis on if. So, Chad, why don't you tell the viewers at home about your experiences watching the show? Did you like it? How did you feel?
Oh, Dude, I loved it. I loved the. I'm biased. I lived in the country for a year and a half, and um, I worked there, and I enjoyed it and whatever. So I love Korean cinema and Korean series. And when Squid Game came along, I sort of thought to myself, oh, there's a big. I don't know. For some reason, Korea's exceptionally popular at the moment. It could be the rise of K-pop or, K-dramas and all of that. And I was a little apprehensive in the beginning because I
Mhm.
was like, oh, it's another Korean fad to sort of jump on. Um, but yeah, I watched the first episode and I was absolutely hooked. I really enjoyed it. From a filmic perspective, it's fantastic. The use of shots, um, the use of the sound, the soundscape itself, it's just beautiful, I think. How about yourself? Did you enjoy it?
Right. So I don't have, I have kind of a strange experience with Squid Game because I had watched it after everyone else in my family had watched it, and they kept telling me to watch Squid Game, and I was like, well, I've got other things to do, you know. And then on
Yeah,
one Friday evening, I was just like, well, I've got nothing else, no work left for the day. Let me just watch Squid Game. And I
yeah.
just binged the whole thing on that Friday evening. I started watching the first episode and I was like, yeah, I'll just watch like 2 or 3 episodes, you know. And I was like, oh, I have to find out what happens next, you know. The whole series just hooked me
Yeah.
in. And I think the interesting thing about it is you're totally right. Korea is kind of having like a blow up in terms of its media, you know. First, before Parasite, there were K-pop and K-drama, BTS, all of that stuff. And now we're looking at Parasite, and now here's Squid Game. It's kind of interesting, and we will talk about this, that there has been a lot of, let's just be real, anti-capitalist media that has been coming out of Korea in as of late, and that it's been hitting so many notes with so many people around the world. Because I think the thing about Squid Game that stands out to me is that even though it is very South Korean, right? Like it's so interesting seeing things like the food and like
Yeah.
seeing like the underbelly of Korea that you kind of don't see if you're just watching K dramas. Like you get to see how
Yeah.
poor people live and how their lives are and stuff like that. But there is a kind of universal appeal to Squid Game because I think a lot of people can watch Squid Game and go, oh yeah, this could have been me if one or two decisions had outcomes have gone against me. And
Oh, absolutely, dude.
I
Sorry, I just wanted to just add to
yeah, go
that.
ahead.
Just what um, just about the relatability. I think many people are fixated on this idea that it's a Korean series and that's why it's doing so well. And Korea is the hot topic at the moment. I don't think so. I think what makes Squid Game popular and what's made it so popular is the relatability. I mean, we can all see it. We may not see the same sort of codes ourselves in our own countries and our own backgrounds, but just the idea that that definitely could be me, and we all know someone or have seen someone who could very well, if this was, let's paint a world quickly of this being a real situation. If this was a real game that's going on, we could possibly all know someone or have seen someone who would have participated. So it's scarily relatable.
Yeah, of course. I think there is some element of Squid Game that I think is kind of uniquely South Korean. Definitely the kinds of games that they do, and stuff
Yes.
like that. But there are so many elements of it that are just like, oh yeah, we all know someone who has bad debts, and if their debts got really bad, or we all know someone that has they've been fired or they've had bad financial difficulties. It's
Yeah.
it's a very relatable show in that way, and there are a couple of other ways that I think the protagonists are very flawed people, right? I don't think any like the failure of Parasite, because I love Parasite. Parasite was one of my favorite movies when it came out, but I think the major failure that it had in a lot of ways was that Parasite was way too subtle, right? Because Parasite's whole message was that it's not about whether you're a good person or a bad person. It's your social class that really indicates how well of a person you will be. Because a rich person can afford to be kind and magnanimous and whatever, and poor people, driven by their desperation, will do terrible things because they are desperate.
Mm,
And
mm,
the fact that the wealthier Park family of that show movie were like relatively, nice people. They weren't like mean or anything like that. And the Kims, they were a lot more, greedy and, sort of depicted in maybe a slightly negative light. I think that kind of, blows past people. But Squid Game is very upfront about it. It's very upfront about how people are very flawed, and it doesn't, and they once they get into a bad situation, they will just do bad things. The idea that a good person can survive in a bad situation is, for the most part, largely, I think, discredited, because, and we'll talk more about that later. But I do think that Squid Game is very upfront. It's upfront with its violence. I was watching, I was thinking, oh yeah, in the first episode, there'll be like maybe 1 or 2 deaths,
Yeah.
But, again, spoiler alert for Squid Game. There's going to be a lot of spoilers this episode. But, in the first episode, like, half the people die. They just get unceremoniously gunned down, playing this red light, green light game. And like, okay, yeah, so this show is not going to pull any punches. And maybe that's one of the reasons why it sticks out in people's minds, because a lot of shows, like, let's be real, this kind of, life or death competition thing is not new. We've seen other media do it to some success, like, for example, with the Hunger Games. I think the brutality maybe on display in Squid Game, the sheer randomness of it sometimes, that I think is maybe a little bit more appealing to a kind of a macabre person. If you're interested in just a pure kind of suspenseful action, well, not action packed per se, but sort of action full story, you will like Squid Game, I think. But if you are interested in a deeper story, you can get that as well. So it definitely is. It definitely is something that's like a broad appeal. So let us, I think, go to the first topic for today, and that is agency. So, Chad, as you said, we all know people who would go to the Squid Game. I think question for you is, do you think you would participate in a Squid Game?
I think part of the success of the show is that it got us all asking that, right? So I sat there a few times and I thought to myself, would I be able to do this? And so I'm quite against violence and things like that, and I don't believe that it should be used in any sort of formal setting with a reason. But it's such a difficult question, because I think that unless you're in that situation, I think it's one of those sort of tired conclusions that I came to is I don't think I could understand what it's like to be in that position and that situation. I've been very fortunate in my life. If you had to press me for an answer, I don't think I could participate. I think it would be. I think after I'd seen, so again, just a little bit of a spoiler for those who haven't seen it. So there's a point where they get to sort of vote whether the game should continue or not. I think I would definitely be voting no.
Yeah.
I think I would want to go home as quickly as possible.
This is going to sound kind of strange coming from me. I've also come from a profoundly privileged background, and therefore the idea of putting myself into that kind of mindset, it does take some work for me. But I am also a very profoundly competitive person, and and when it comes to competing with other people, I think I can imagine competing in something like that. But I think I would also want to vote to stop, because you're right, life and death, that's a very different sort of situation. So just to clarify for the audience at home, one of the things about Squid Game is that there are like 3 rules that the contestants are told. That the first rule, I think, is like if you don't participate, if you don't participate, you will be eliminated, right? So you can't not choose to play the games if you have elected to play the games, so on and so forth. But the third rule is that the games can be ended at any time by majority vote. So basically, if the players decide, they can vote on whether or not to continue in the games. And if they all vote no, then the game will stop. Here's the catch. If the games stop, then all the money that they've accumulated thus far is divided amongst all the people who have died. So there's kind of this kind of catch-22 situation, where if you are having a hard time and you're worried about dying, and you don't want to do it anymore, you are kind of like, there's another part of your brain that's like, wait a minute, if we don't continue, not only will I have to go back, empty-handed, but all the people, the families of all the people who have died, they'll be benefiting from my, sort of sacrifice. So almost in a way, there's kind of a pseudo prisoner's dilemma, that's going on here. Because everyone is also thinking, wait a minute, all I have to do is beat these guys and I can get this massive payday. I don't actually, want to maybe miss out on that opportunity. And I think it is something that you really have to kind of think about, because the circumstances that drive these people to participate in the Squid Game are both shockingly mundane and also incredibly horrific, right? So I think we have to talk about like agency, right? Because the thing about Squid Game is that they are doing this on their own free will. They have to sign a contract basically at the beginning of the game that indicates that they are consenting to participate in the Squid Games. Now, they aren't necessarily told that they will be doing a life or death situation. So maybe you could make the argument from a rules lawyery, kind of perspective that, hey, they weren't told explicitly that it would be life or death. However, you're right, they do have the ability to vote on, ending the game at any time. And you're totally right, they do that. After the first game, where about half of them die, they vote and they actually stop the game. Which is, a surprise, because I was like, oh, wait a minute, the show's going to end. But then it turns out that actually, no. You see, the circumstances that drove these people, the poverty that they were in, the owing of money, the debts, the lack of opportunities, that's actually really hard. Like, the vast majority of the players actually decide to go back into the Squid Game and, face potential life or death, even though they know that, they could die at any moment, And, like, how do you feel about that? Do you think that's good or bad?
Look, I think it's an interesting. That's going to be a bit of a tired phrase, I guess, after this podcast. But I keep saying it's an interesting question. Something that I just wanted to touch on while we're here is I just thought the idea of voting to stop and having agency over, I suppose, your own destiny as well as the destiny of others was such a cool little comment on democracy.
Mm-hmm.
We, especially for those who are not South African, we've just gone through a major election in our country's history, municipal elections, and the idea that you have the opportunity, and if the majority agrees with you, you can get out of this situation, but actually you can't, because you have this crippling debt, and this debt that sort of will follow you around for the rest of your life. So just on the point of agency, I don't really know if these people do have agency. Yes, they do, or from a literal sense. And that's what capitalism is so good at. It says to you, yes, you don't have to participate. You don't have to be here. You don't have to be part of this whole situation. But the thing is, your circumstances, they kind of mandate that you do have to try and push yourself to beat other people at the end of the day. I've actually just completely sidetracked myself and forgotten your question. Can you ask me again?
No, I think what Squid Game does is it presents us with something that we don't often think about, and that is the coercive nature of our society, right? You're totally right. You are totally free to not participate in the Squid Game, right? These people didn't have to join the Squid Game. No one kidnapped them at gunpoint and said, you're participating in the Squid Game now, you don't have a choice. No, they had a choice. However, we have to think about what kind of choice they did have. Like Ji-hoon, for example, his mother is dying of diabetes at the start of the series, basically. The catalyst for him to decide to actually do this really is the fact that he can't afford the medical bills required to treat her. And between that and his lack of job opportunities, he kind of doesn't really have a choice, really. If he wants to get the money quickly to save her, this is kind of it. This is kind of it. And that's not to mention many of the other characters, like Sang-woo, who is his childhood friend. Sang-woo is wanted by the police for embezzlement. Yeah. He is, wanted on many financial crimes. He owes a lot of money. In fact, he owes more money than Ji-hoon, which is something that is quite a surprise, because Sang-woo is supposedly the genius of their little, not suburb, district, I guess. For viewers at home, Sang-woo is repeatedly touted as a very intelligent, character. Like, oh, he's the one poor guy who managed to get out of the slums. He actually went to university and he made something of himself. It turns out that actually, he is pretty clever, but he also ended up doing some financial crimes. And
just on a side note.
Valuable advice at home. If your friend starts talking to you about crypto, walk away.
They're Sang-wooing you, man.
Yeah, they're Sang-wooing you. Oh man, that's good. To Sang-woo someone is to trick them into a financial. To trick them financially. That's a nice pun. But yeah, so these people are very desperate, right? They don't have much in the way of opportunities. Ji-hoon doesn't have a job, lined up. His idea of making money at the beginning of the game is to go to a horse track and bet. It's not as if there's all that much opportunity. And when you look at the other characters, they have a lot of debt. Many of them are in very precarious financial situations, or they are kind of really, really stuck where they are. And they just have no other option. I think because that is kind of the coercive nature of sort of capitalism, because you're not forced to participate, but if you don't participate, the consequences will be very severe. I would argue that if you really want it to be free, then the consequences of not participating should be very minimal. But just like in real life, we kind of don't really have an option whether or not to pay our rent, or to buy food, or to get healthcare and stuff like that. Not really, because you would die without it, right? That is kind of an issue, because we can talk about how much agency the players have, right? Another thing is that there are both good and bad players in the Squid Game, right? There are some people who survive just by pure luck. The fact that they aren't immediately gunned down, in the first round can to some extent be chalked up to luck. But then there are other players like Ji-hoon and Sang-woo and what is the lady? Lord, her name escapes me. Yeah, and these people are much better at playing the game than other people are, and that's kind of to some extent the way that a lot of people are today, because there are some people who are much better at the system than other people are, and these people might win or lose, and yet they still choose to participate in this game, because you could argue that some of the more criminal members of the cast, they don't really need to participate in the Squid Game. They could probably be criminals, but that's not much of a life either. The bully, the criminal guy, Dong-suk, I think his name is. No,
I think it's Doksu.
Doksu. Yeah, Doksu is a gangster, right? And he's shown at several. He wants to rob the Squid Game. He's like, oh yeah, just get some gangsters, get some guns. We'll just hijack the van, attack the Squid Game guys, take all their money. He's living a criminal life, but even though he's there, he still has debts to other people. He's still kind of trapped by the same sort of logic of the system, and that is one of the reasons why he's shunted into the game. And he was already living kind of a life of stakes, kind of life, because he was already killing people, murdering people, living in that kind of way. And for other people who are maybe a little bit less used to it, it's still kind of a shock to the system, regardless.
Mm-hmm.
Something that I also wanted to touch on is that 45 billion won seems like a lot of money, but it's only $38 million, just to Americanize everything. But $38 million is a lot of money. It's more money than I will probably ever see in my entire lifetime. But if you look at the people who watch the Squid Game, if you look at the VIPs and the people who run the Squid Game, that's nothing compared to them, right? You look at Elon Musk getting like $38 billion or something like that in a day, and you're like, oh, okay. Wow, so even if I did win the Squid Game, I don't really have the kind of financial power like someone like that has, and even though I might win, my victory is kind of meaningless in a it's very strange how some people can look at a show like Squid Game and go, yeah, these people are in a dire situation, they shouldn't be in this situation. And then you turn it around and then, okay, well, what about people in real life? What about homeless people, that are living on the street? Are they just homeless because they've all made terrible decisions and it's a punishment? Or maybe housing is too expensive, Maybe housing shouldn't be subjected to a market that can kind of explode at a whim, of a bank or something. Yeah. I think that's solid. That brings us to a nice segue talking about people like Elon Musk. I was super interested by the depiction of the VIPs. How did you find them?
The VIPs for me were interesting characters. The idea of the VIPs just being able to just walk into the situation and sort of command. What was interesting for me from a filmic perspective was just the idea that they could walk into this world that does not acknowledge them for. It does acknowledge them. I mustn't lie. There's parts where I think his name is the Game Maker. No, not the Game Maker. That's Hungarians.
Are you talking about the front man?
Yeah, the front man. There we go. So the front man speaks English, so you kind of get the sort of Easter eggs, if you will, that the people that are invested in the Squid Game are maybe foreign or probably American. What was very interesting about the game makers for me is the idea that they could just come in and sort of decide what's going on and how they were so flippant in betting on people's lives. And it really is. I'm glad that you brought up our boy Elon, who, the other day was saying, you come up, I think he was speaking to the UN.
He was talking to the WHO.
Yeah, to the WHO, and basically said, you come up with a model of to end world hunger, and I'll give you the money. And that idea that you can sort of play with hunger for me is deplorable. You're sitting there and going, if you do this thing, I will give you the money so that you can do this thing. I don't know. That for me is just really odd. And I know the Musk boys are sitting there and going, well, he doesn't want corruption and he doesn't want people to, steal from the money. But I don't know if that's enough for me, So that idea, that link between people who say, well, screw whatever's going on here. These are human lives. I'll just come in and dictate things to them and dictate how their lives are ultimately going to end is a really horrific thing for me. And, the way that they were portrayed, very arrogant, very, what's the word, predatory, was a very nice, not very nice, but a very, I guess it was a nice way to make it sort of understandable for maybe people that do support this type of person, and kind of look at this is what they're like behind the scenes. Look, I know, again, the Musk boys are shouting at me and saying, well, this is a series. It's not like this in real life. But I genuinely do believe that if you can say to people, only if you produce this thing will I give you the money to do this thing, I think you must be quite similar to the investment.
So I have to do some. I just want to provide some context again for the any fans of Elon Musk who have seen this. Hi, hello. Your fave is very problematic. But so I think from what I remember, he had what plan he was talking about wasn't to end world. Well, at least from the WHO's perspective, it wasn't about ending world hunger. It was just about taking, I think it was like 42 million people who are in dire threat of starvation. So these are people who are starving right now that could be fed for about $6 billion, right? And I think the idea that there's a single person, that there's just one human being who has that kind of capital, that kind of ability to move and shake on that kind of large, grand scale. Yeah, you're right. That doesn't sit well to me because I'm already distrustful of politicians, who are elected by a quote-unquote democratic process. We can argue about how democratic it actually is. But the idea that someone is unelected and they have that much power, or they have an approximation of that kind of power, that definitely doesn't sit well with me. And Elon Musk definitely is in the class of people who would, in my opinion, watch something like a Squid Game. Because we knew when the whole Jeffrey Epstein came out, when Jeffrey Epstein was murdered, was that there is a cabal of people. The wealthy do have a tendency to do heinous stuff behind the scrutiny of the public, and actually that is a point to touch on later. But yeah, it is something to sort of keep in mind. I do agree with you though. The VIPs are very interesting because, firstly, they are, I think, primarily American, and that I think is very targeted. Right? There is, I think, one Chinese member in the VIPs, but most of them are American. And they have a very one-dimensional, presentation. They're crass, they're boorish, they're violent, they're lustful, they're all these terrible things. I think they sit on chairs and tables made of actual people, right?
Yeah.
There are actual human beings that they are sitting on and resting on and using as cushions and chairs and things like. Whoa, okay, these people really just don't give a damn, and it is very one-dimensional. Someone could, maybe make an argument that it's a bit of a straw man. I don't necessarily think that's correct, though, because I think that the point of depicting the VIPs in this way is that they are basically looking for a product, right? They are looking for something that Korea is providing to them, and that is entertainment. It's a different category, because you could argue that if we're watching, say, the football or cricket or something, and we're just people are just drinking beers, eating chips, just hanging out and doing all that stuff. They are maybe indulging a little bit in too much alcohol, too much gluttony, so on and so forth. But it's not as if you're going to be sipping slowly some Chardonnay and watching football. That's not really what you do. And when you're engaging in very overt, very engaged entertainment, like watching people, die for money, maybe it would be almost too tasteless to do it the other way around, to have the VIPs be the sophisticated people, these gourmands of violence, Maybe actually what you need them to do is you need them to be these vicious, horrible people because they are doing a vicious, horrible thing. There's no real way around it,
Yeah.
I wanted to actually pick your brain about this because I think it's one of the most important but understated parts about Squid Game is the fact that these people are primarily depicted as American, right? And I think that the shadow of American capital and America in general looms over tremendously in South Korea. And I was wondering what you thought the director was, because he could have made a bunch of VIPs. He could have made them not specifically American, But I think he chose very specifically to make them American. What do you think that says about America and sort of the relationship that it has with South Korea?
Well, I think for those who don't know, during the war, the Korean Peninsula was divided into two. So you had the North and South, and you had the Soviet Union, who controlled the north part of the peninsula, and then you had the south part, which was controlled by America. And what did America do? They came in and they injected a whole bunch of money, and they sort of I guess almost fast-tracked Korea's recovery. Let's leave out the fact that, they were a major player in Korea's downfall initially, but they fast-tracked Korea and really injected Korea with capitalism. Mm-hmm. My experience is a lot of Korea is... I'm sorry to any Korean listeners, but for me, Korea seemed to be very Americanized and very American, almost American crazy.
Yeah, there's a strange relationship, I think, that the show has with America in general, right? Like, for example, whenever a character is whenever they're discussed as doing well or being well off, it's always they're in America, right? So Ji-hoon's another catalyzing reason for why Ji-hoon wants to enter the Squid Game is because his ex-wife, who he has a daughter with, and her new husband are leaving Korea to go to America for a better job, right? And if they go, they will take his daughter with her. And it's even said it very explicitly by Ji-hoon's mother. Well, when she goes there, she'll forget her Korean and you won't be able to talk to her. almost in a way that you're a loser to America, right?
Yeah.
So that's like one aspect of it. And then another aspect is that, Sang-woo and many other characters, when they're depicted as, oh yeah, they're doing well, they're in business in America, right? As if somehow, as if somehow America is this land of like milk and honey, and Korea is not. Which is a very interesting dynamic that they've got going on there.
Yeah, it's really weird. So I found when I was living there, quite a few of my friends were quite, kind of obsessed with America, and that is, and especially the kids that I taught as well. They can tell you all these American things. They don't know any other countries, but they can tell you 100 different facts about America. They can recognize American monuments and so on and so forth. So I thought the depiction of the VIPs sort of, for me, it was twofold. So I definitely think the idea of the threat of foreign capital, I think a lot more Koreans are becoming aware that America is not always the good guy. And they're sort of not steering clear. They're still, it's ingrained in their society and so on and so forth. But I think a lot of them are realizing that, America is not this perfect country, and America sort of invests in places for their own interest. I mean, obviously every country does, but there's very little, or I would argue that there might be good that comes about from that, but at the same time, the good sort of benefits America more than the actual country itself. And what we've seen, or what I saw while I was there, was quite a little bit of, there was a little bit of a shift, particularly amongst younger Koreans. This shift away from, America's not the be all and end all, it's not the full stop to the sentence. And I thought the way that, what's very interesting here, also a lived experience, is that Korea's got this thing where restaurants or bars or clubs, they can refuse foreigners entry into the establishment. They can refuse service to foreigners. I mean, I wouldn't say it's shunned upon. I mean, obviously businesses want to make money, but there are a few places that I encountered where they said, no, you're foreign, you can't come in. This is Koreans only. Or you see the sign, Koreans only. And I spoke to my friend, he's a small business owner there in Korea, and he said the reason that businesses do it is the American military guys who are consistently stationed there. They get, whatever break they get at the military. I don't know, I don't really care about the military much, but they get some stupid break and they go out, and because they're so ingrained in, or so, I guess, limited in the base itself, they absolutely go wild when they run it through the streets of Korea, and they break things. And when I was there was a guy who, the curfew was lifted for the military guys, and literally the first night we were all sitting at my friend's cafe and sort of sitting and saying, well, we wonder how it's going to go. And then literally the first night, an American guy stole a taxi from a Korean taxi driver and drove it into some building. It was this big story, and I think because of that type of behavior, Koreans are becoming a little bit more wary of America. And just to link it back to Squid Game, the depiction of the VIPs being so boorish and being so gross, for lack of a better term, I think Koreans have cottoned on to that because they've had this foreign ban for quite a bit as well. Or not a ban, but because it's not a blanket ban, but they can refuse service. And it's because of the way that a lot of the American military members, or I shouldn't say a lot, but some have acted in the past. So this depiction of the VIPs, the way that they are depicted, I think makes it much more relatable to Koreans as well. I mean, when you go out in Korea, you go out for a big night, you go out for a couple of beers, and it's very often, if there's an altercation or a fight or something, it's very often American people that are involved. So yeah, that whole idea of them being in control and they're American, they can do whatever they want. I thought the way that they depicted the VIPs really came across, and I went, oh yeah, that's what they're like when they're in Korea, when they're away from their own laws and things like that. So yeah, it was very interesting and very well done, I thought.
Yeah, I found it really fascinating because I look at I look at the depiction of the VIPs as an indication of sort of, in a broader sense, that this is what capitalism is, right? This is, you are churning your own poor people for the entertainment value of, a wealthy upper class somewhere else. And in particular, in the relationship that America has to Korea, is that you're right. America did hyper-inject South Korea with capitalism, right? It did have some benefits. I don't want to be an ideologue, because obviously I think South Korea is a better place to live than North Korea. That's definitely true. Right? And it definitely helped their development. But as you said, there's, there's always a catch. And in this particular case, the catch was falling under the ideological and geopolitical control of the United States, because I think everyone knows that one of the reasons why South Korea can retain its sovereignty is that the threat of America defending it is there, right?
Yeah.
And I also, don't misquote me. I don't think it would be okay if North Korea invaded and, forcibly annexed South Korea. I think that would be wrong.
Yeah.
But definitely, there is this relationship between the United States where South Korea is the, I hate to say this, but it's the submissive sort of, right? Because they do have to have American military personnel there. They do have to have army bases, and military guys are kind of all the same, right? I think there's something about being in the military that kind of messes you up a little bit, and you do tend to do more terrible things. I think the history of military guys in foreign army bases has kind of proven that. So if it wasn't Americans, it would be someone else. Funnily enough, if you go back in time, it was probably these Japanese invaders, their military bases. It'd be the same kind of thing.
100%.
But it is interesting that you have these people who are watching Squid Game, and obviously no one is putting on Squid Game if it isn't making them money, right? That's like the thing. No one is the VIPs are paying probably a lot of money for Squid Game, and this sort of commodification of this whole thing is just kind of ultimately just another sort of capitalist development, because it's just another way of monetizing the misery that sort of capitalism generates, right? You're taking it to the next step. Instead of just generating misery as a side product of generating profit, now you're monetizing the misery to generate more misery. That I thought was really, really clever. I was thinking about that a lot, because even though the VIPs are shown very seldomly, they are literally, I think, in like 1 or 2 episodes at the end. I think they say a lot about what the show is about why Squid Game is the way that it is, because hypothetically, game shows do exist, right? There are game shows where people participate for non-lethal prizes, games like Ninja Warrior, and I'll admit it, I love watching Ninja Warrior. It's so cool watching people do stunts, right? But if I were incredibly rich and I were incredibly inured to the consequences of regular entertainment, I kind of have to wonder if maybe or not I would want Ninja Warrior, but the actual guy dies if he falls into a pit. And that is another good segue to our next topic. I think the second last one that I've got prepared for today, and that is, I think it's really interesting in in Squid Game that you have these people and they're participating in their trials and tribulations, and they have very different sort of contexts for how they get treated. A character that I thought was really, really interesting was Ali, right? For viewers at home, Ali is a Pakistani immigrant to Korea. So as we talked about it in our last Korean episode, Korea is not a homogenous country. You were there, and you're obviously not Korean. So, I was wondering if you could maybe speak a little bit about the perspective of, a character like Ali, who is, a darker-skinned immigrant living in Korea, and how Korean people kind of, treat him. Because he definitely has a very interesting perspective as a character. I'll talk about that in a second, but I want your perspective first.
Look, like you said, I think maybe 15, 20 years ago, Korea was way more homogenous. It was more, it was quite, maybe even further back, about 30 years ago, it was quite a rare thing to see a person of color um, or as many people of color as you see today, obviously. Um, and the reality is there are a lot of migrant workers in Korea, and usually they are brown people. You do get, I mean, the inverse is also true. I mean, there's a hell of a lot of Russians as well, who tend to end up working in Korea and doing sort of handyman work and so on and so forth. But there's interesting tensions around Ali and the idea. I mean, what's also quite just as a bit of a sidebar for me is the actor that plays Ali. He lives in Korea, but he's actually Indian as well. And he spoke
Yeah.
Urdu in the show itself. But and India had a really big. They went, quite wild about the whole idea that he's an Indian guy playing a Pakistani, and there was a little bit of a tension there.
Oh
But
yeah.
just getting back to the idea of how he's perceived, I think, and what they did well with him as well, and he's a fantastic actor, is Korean people nowadays, what I found also is if you can speak the language and you sort of kind of immerse yourself in the culture, they're quite accepting of a character like that. Again, the class thing for me, I think, would also come into play. There are districts in Korea. There's a district there, for example, called Itaewon. If anybody's seen the other Netflix series, Itaewon Class, they'll know the name Itaewon. Itaewon is quite it's quite a foreign district, and you do see a hell of a lot more brown people and black people walking around and living there. What's very interesting for me, or what my perspective, and again, I could be just clutching at straws, this is just from my perspective, I found Itaewon to be a little bit more neglected. So it kind of seems like the municipalities don't really look after the migrants and the foreign populations that lived there. It seemed a lot more, it's part of Seoul, it's a district in Seoul, but it seemed a little bit less taken care of,
Yeah.
which was interesting for me. And look, as a brown person living in Korea, you did get the stares, you did get the looks. But yeah, look, I think he was a very interesting character. I love that he spoke Korean pretty much throughout the thing. And I think that Korean audiences and I think he was an important character for Korean audiences as well, to also see that here, this is a Korean show. It comes out of your context, but here's a guy, speaking Korean, giving a different perspective. Maybe pay attention to him as well as a character and how you treat maybe, migrant laborers and so on.
Yeah, like the thing again, I spoke about how Squid Game is kind of a very universal show, and I think the thing is, the character of Ali is very much, and also it is kind of funny that you have an Indian person playing a Pakistani. We are forever struggling with that particular issue, but I think it's really interesting because Ali is the kind of character that is a universal character, right? Because if you go to any other country in the world, there are people like Ali. There may be from other parts of the world, Like, for example, if you go to America, maybe someone who is a Korean person who does not necessarily speak the best English, who doesn't know, who sticks out a little bit, maybe in a more white area. Those kinds of characters, Ali is kind of universal in that way because he's a representative of an immigrant. And something that is very interesting, of course, is that, it's kind of ambiguous as to whether or not he's there legally. It is this, because the big thing for me is that Ali worked at a factory, right? He's consistently praised for his strength. Like in the opening episode, with one hand, he's able to hold Ji-yoon and save him from dying. Because in the first episode, they're doing red light, green light, and if you move when you're not supposed to, you get shot. Ji-yoon falls over, and Ali grabs him with one hand and holds him there for a long time, mind you, longer than I could typically do it. And he's very strong, right? And he worked in a factory, and he was, by all intents and purposes, a good worker. He came to Korea to make money, for his family because he didn't have as many opportunities back home in Pakistan, which is, the story of basically almost all immigrants everywhere. He learned Korean, and he seems to be fairly respectful, but the idea of whether or not he's still legal is still something that hangs over him, right? He worked for a boss that was able to keep cutting his paychecks or keep denying him his paychecks because, what's Ali going to do? Is he going to go to the police? What if the police deport him? That is
100.
something that I think a lot of Latin American people can maybe empathize with if they are in a place like the United States, where immigration issues are a big deal. Like Ali is as relatable to maybe a Mexican migrant in the United States as he might be to say a Korean migrant living in somewhere like Russia, somewhere where they're not necessarily from. And it's the idea that he's actually even more exploitable than these other regular Korean people, because Ji-hoon and all of the other Korean people, they are very expendable by the system. Obviously, they're in a game where they die, at a moment's whim. But Ali is even more expendable, because when he dies, probably no one's really going to care. It's not going to be a thing. But someone like it's like Sang-woon, someone who is a respected at least former respected member of the community. If he dies, that will be a big deal. But if Ali dies, it's sort of interesting, in terms of like the way it's contextualized, because Ali dies off screen, and then he's dumped, and we never really see his family. We never get any sort of further indication if they made it home to Pakistan or anything like that. For all they know, he just disappeared, Whereas we do get some more closure with other characters, granted, obviously, because they directly know Ji-hoon. But still, it's kind of, maybe it's a commentary about the disposability of, even though he is as poor as the other people, he's maybe a little bit more disposable, because there's an axis of intersectionality here that we have to consider, that he is, not only is he a poor person, but he's also an immigrant. He's also brown-skinned, in a country that is not, amenable to that. And he's also, I guess... he's you're also be Muslim, in a country that's and it's all these different things that kind of intersect, because you have to comment on it without commenting on it in a way. And I think that Squid Game does a good job of hanging it in the air, where anyone who's looking will see it, but if you don't, if you miss it, it's also okay.
Yeah, 100%. And just on what you were saying, I'm actually, while we're busy chatting, I'm just actually reading an article at the same time about this year was the first, it's the first decline in foreign population in Korea since 2006 because of the pandemic. And, just some of the stats here, foreign population in Korea shrunk by about 3.2% last year. And, so the foreign population in Korea is not big. I think here it says the number of foreign nationals in that month was 4.7 year on year. So, 4.7% of the population is foreign. A lot of those foreign nationals are from other Asian countries. So I know that they are, there's quite a few Chinese people that live in Korea. There's quite a few Vietnamese people. But the idea that Ali is brown and possibly undocumented, I thought was really nicely and really tactfully done, dealt with, I thought, actually. And how they sort of framed him as quite a lovable character for me was interesting, because Korea, they do have one or two foreigners, and there's one or two that I can think of off the top of my head, brown foreigners that are quite beloved by the Korean population. There's a YouTuber whose name I cannot remember now. He's quite popular. He's a Black American guy. But this idea of framing Ali as quite a lovable character, even though he's undocumented, and Korea does have, they do have quite a firm stance of illegal immigration and so on and so forth. So the framing of him was really beautifully done, because here, or in Korea, a lot of people will say, but he's undocumented, it's an issue for us. But they framed him as such a lovable character and such an important character. I thought it was beautifully, beautifully done, almost to sort of place a little bit of compassion in the hearts of Koreans also, to say that, this guy is also going through the same issues. He's in Korea and he's not Korean. Have a little bit of compassion and empathy for him.
Yeah, the thing is, as someone who watches a lot of TV that doesn't necessarily see a lot of Indian people, or not Central Asia, but sort of Indian, Middle Eastern people, it's interesting to see him in a show like this, because they could have easily just not put him there, right? They could have easily just said, this is a Korean show, it's going to be about Korean people. But it was nice to actually see it because I looked at it and got, oh yeah, right. We also kind of exist. We're also there. It's not just, and I think it's good. And I think you're right. I think it does go towards normalizing people like Ali as not inherently bad people. Does he do some bad things? Yeah, he does. He ends up, again, spoilers. He ends up, he and his boss get into a fight. And he ends up maiming his boss by shoving his hand into a machine and stealing his boss's money. Now, of course, you could make the argument that his boss was stealing from him and, probably running an unsafe workplace. So, karma or whatever. But it's not as if, that's a crime that definitely the police would have hunted him down for,
Yeah, sure.
So he's not exactly guiltless, but he's still nevertheless, a good person who still tries to do the best that he can. He's one of the most trusting people. He's one of the most trusting people on the show, to the point that it actually causes his demise. He trusts Sang-woo, and Sang-woo betrays him, and that's how Ali ends up actually getting killed. And it's kind of a point that a lot of these people in these more vulnerable situations, they do some terrible things, but also they can be exploited.
And be exploited.
Yeah, because they don't have that support system. He doesn't necessarily. He is grasp of Korean is not necessarily perfect, and he doesn't have the same kind of support network that Sang-woo. Sang-woo is actually, even though Sang-woo has very little money because he's in debts and on the run, and stuff like that, he's still able to buy this guy food and a bus ticket, which is more than he had. He was planning on walking, back home when they get ejected from the Squid Game the first time around. So that is another sort of point to consider. This is why I like Squid Game, because they're not necessarily the biggest elements of the plot, but they're so interesting to think about. Okay, so I think we're almost running out of time. I don't want to keep you for too long because I know that you have other things to do. We have maybe one last point, and then we can do a couple of fun points, and then we'll wrap this podcast episode up. And if you guys would like us to go more into Squid Game, because I have a whole typed out document of things to talk about, please let us know. I would love to do a part 2, Chad. I'm sure you'd like to do a part 2 as well. I think the last final point is there has been some discourse online, mostly from Tim Pool, if I'm honest, about how conservatives are not understanding Squid Game. So Tim Pool famously said that Squid Game is a metaphor for communism instead of capitalism, and he even said that the creator of the show was too dumb to know that he was criticizing capitalism. That he was criticizing communism. And he's like, oh yeah, the creator was like, this is a criticism of capitalism, And I wanted to pick your brain about this. Why do you think conservatives might actually misinterpret Squid Game? Because Squid Game is very blunt about what its messages are. It's very blunt about how the system is exploitative, it's coercive. The rich end up, harming the poor, and so on and so forth. Why do you think why do you think someone can even have that kind of take on this media?
I don't. I want to be a little bit harsher than you, and I want to say that I don't think it's a misinterpretation. I think it's a bit of a hardline ideology. For me, it's. I mean, anybody who doesn't know who Tim Pool is should go and look him up. And you have the poster boy for young conservative. He's even got the moustache.
He's every guy who's tried to bum a cigarette from you.
Every guy outside the club that's like, hey, bro, are you having a good evening? Can I have a Marlboro? Look, I think it's hardlining, to be honest with you. I don't think that there's a misinterpretation, anything like that. I think it's conservatives sort of, remember, for many conservatives, particularly I think conservative Americans, capitalism is the be-all and end-all. It is what made America into, quote-unquote, the greatest country in the world. And it's an untouchable ideology. And I think as soon as someone comes across and sort of critiques it, it's this idea and again, it's the lull, I want to put it at, the lull of capitalism, in that, capitalism is untouchable, communism is evil, or socialism is evil. It's that idea that even if someone is willing to come forward and say, here's a piece of media that critiques your ideology, people want to hardline and stick to it and go, no, actually. So I was just saying it's about hardlining. It's about as soon as someone places a piece of media that says capitalism is fallible, it can be critiqued. I think people see that as an attack on Americanism and attack on themselves. I think they take it personally. So I don't think it's a misinterpretation. I think it's purely hardlining, to be honest. What do you think?
I think, I am kind of torn sometimes, because I do think Tim Pool is kind of dumb. I do think he definitely doesn't think about the things that he says, right? So on the one hand, I could totally see someone being just like, oh yeah, this is communism because everyone wears the same clothing, and the game is, oh, you're supposed to be equal, but like, actually, no, not really. But on the other hand, I do actually think maybe he does have an ideological reason, because obviously Squid Game is the most popular media. It's the show that everyone is watching, right? And if the most popular show that everyone is watching is a show about, hey, capitalism is bad because it forces people to enter crazy life or death competitions to make enough money to survive, that is criticism that is definitely going to be against you. If you're a conservative, you have to be doing everything that you can to get people to not care about Squid Game. Because here's the truth. People don't watch conservative shows. The best movies, the best shows are not made by conservatives, right? I was telling someone about Dune the other day. Dune is a show that is fundamentally progressive in its messaging, right? It's not like socialist or whatever, because it's about monarchies and stuff. But Dune is about a discourse about the nature of power and how you have to actually kind of be very skeptical about power and stuff like that. That's not a right-wing message, necessarily. Frank Herbert was not a conservative, and Dune is one of the most popular movies of 2021. So people are not watching no one's watching a conservative version of Squid Game. Let's be real. No one's watching a conservative. So they have to get into the media space. They have to talk about it, and they have to do damage control in a sense. So to some respect, I do think it is kind of like a coping procedure. But I also do think Tim Pool is kind of obtuse, and I do think that he would look at it's like, the thing that annoys me is that Squid Game is so blatant. It's so blatant about, like, this is a discourse about capitalism. Capitalism is an unfair system, because South Korea is capitalist, right? It's not like, North Korea is capitalist. No. South Korea is a capitalist nation, and all of the consequences of Squid Game arise from the consequences of capitalism. So it's very upfront in your face, but I still think, some people can maybe... Like, I always say that, Parasite was good, but it was too indirect, so a lot of people missed the message. Then I saw Squid Game, it's like, oh wow, Squid Game is really direct. There's no way anyone could, misinterpret the message. It's like, oh wow, I was totally wrong. So I made a joke, my joke review of Squid Game on Facebook. This was actually the reason why we started planning for this episode, was that, I said something like, Squid Game was great, but did anyone else find it weird that at the end of the show, Karl Marx just shows up and directly stares at the camera and says, I told you, bro, for like 5 minutes? Because I feel like even if the show was even more overt, more in your face, people would have misinterpreted it. But, then again, conservatives will do whatever they can.
100%. I just wanted to add on that as well. I've seen quite from, obviously it's good to sort of look at the critique and what people are saying against the show. I read a review. I actually used it in my English exam the other day. This guy was saying that, Squid Game is very violent and so on and so forth, and it's unnecessary violence and whatever. And I think that sort of ties in with this point, is that the idea of Squid Game is to show you the violence of capitalism and what capitalism is capable of, and what it does to people. And I think that this idea that capitalism is untouchable, or this idea that Squid Game is sort of coming for American values, for me is really like sitting weirdly, because that's essentially what a lot of the critique that I've heard, and I don't know. It just, for me, it's so infuriating, because it really is that situation where you're sitting and going, dude, this is what this thing is about. That's what it is. That's what it was made. The directors told you what it's about. Why do you choose not to see that? And yeah, I totally agree with you. I think it's 100% this idea of, well, it's damage control. There is no conservative media really to speak of, or not that I've seen, that's worth watching.
Yeah.
And so it really does become a case of, well, we have to counter it because it is attacking us.
Yeah, it's funny to me, that conservatives talk a big talk, but like the biggest media is all basically made by liberals or to some extent, progressives. Everyone loved Parasite when it came out. Parasite was made by, a progressive. Parasite was anti-capitalist. Squid Game is anti-capitalist. The next big thing to blow up in Korea will probably be anti-capitalist, because Korea is kind of doing hyper-capitalism, and it's not good for the people there. And clearly there's a impulse, there's a will that is coming in the Korean people. And actually, probably in all people, which is another reason why Squid Game is so beloved, is because people recognize that actually, this whole capitalism thing is not really working out for us. It's not really working out as they said it would. And so, people are yearning for something that expresses or articulates a desire for something better. But yeah, no one's watching like a Ben Shapiro's movie. Let's be real. It is a school shooter movie. No one's watching that. I always tell people this, but like fun fact, like Ben Shapiro wanted to be a scriptwriter in Hollywood, and he just got rejected. They just didn't like him or his scripts, so that's why he became a conservative, pundit. And I'm like, I don't know which is worse: the idea that Ben Shapiro could have somehow stopped being like a conservative, like megamind, if he just got accepted into Hollywood and made like D-list movies for the rest of his life, or if him making those movies would have been worse.
I would take it like a step further and say, I mean, almost anything can be produced in Hollywood these days, and the fact that Ben Shapiro didn't get in, I mean, good Lord.
Yeah.
That speaks volumes about him and his abilities. But yeah, we should totally do more hate on him. Love doing that.
It is very funny. So I just I thought I would wrap up with a fun sort of a caveat, not a caveat, a palate cleanser, because Squid Game is kind of serious. So I thought it would be fun to talk about like other versions of Squid Game, so other countries, like South African version of Squid Game. Because I was watching Squid Game, I was like, we South Africa is a kind of crazy people. I've seen South African Survivor. It's wild. People are wilding out there. I feel like a South African version of Squid Game would be something like, I don't know, Tokoloshi Game, or something like that.
It would be crazy, man.
Yeah.
Some of the games we played in primary school. I mean, I'm just thinking about hand tennis in the class. I mean, that got seriously intense, and there was no life or death stakes there, but it felt like it.
Oh yeah.
So I can.
It would be, you would play hand tennis, but like the tennis court would be suspended over like a giant chasm. And if the ball goes off, like your platform just falls and you die or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's something that I think would be really funny. And this is not what I want the director to do, because I want him to make season 2, which is I think now confirmed. I want him to make season 2 the way that he wants to make season 2. But I do think it would be really funny if the next if like more Squid Games came out and they were like from other countries with other different like nations. And I think it would just be really entertaining in a kind of morbid way. Like, oh yeah, like what is the weird violent stuff that people in Brazil or, Guatemala or wherever else, they would do these other Squid Games. Like that would just, there's a part of my brain that really just wants to, to see that,
Yeah. And, just also to see some of the childhood games that other countries play.
Yeah.
I saw a couple of my students, I know that they used to play red light, green light. I
Mhm.
know. I did see like I didn't see as an elaborate version of Squid Game, but I did see something similar when I was there
Oh
as
yeah.
well. So I mean, I'm thinking about some of the games that we could have. I mean, 1, 2, 3, block myself. That would be seriously high stakes. And we go out to the Kruger somewhere, 1, 2, 3, block myself. Oh, lion around the corner. We'll see if you survive.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, that would
I
totally
think
be in the South African version of the Squid Game. It's just
that
done in
would
the
be
Kruger.
outstanding. I think another sort of great game to play would maybe be driving in Johannesburg. I think
Oh
that's a
yeah.
short game within itself. Um, just avoiding taxis driving into you, avoiding the road rage from what you would see or what you would.
You know what I think would happen. I feel like instead of having the tug of war game, it would just be a game of touch rugby, and you just have to like scrum the other team off the side of it. Don't tell me that wouldn't happen, Chad. If there was a South African version, it would just be all right. Form into a scrum and just push the other team off the edge of a platform.
British Bulldogs. Did you guys play it?
No, we didn't. But I went to
Did you
boys'
play?
high, so
Did you play Open Gate?
yeah, we played. I think we played that one.
Yeah, so it's pretty similar. Would be a fantastic Squid Game, I think. Just you basically run from, I don't know, one side of East Rand Mall to the other, and people try and tackle you down.
Yeah.
There would be so many cool South African games. There were so many what do you call these games where the girls used to like clap hands and whatever? I don't know what they called, but there was like 100, and there was like so many different rhymes that you had. I remember double double this.
Yeah,
There would
something
be so many cool games.
something that did get mentioned on the show was
Yeah,
that there are like games in Korea that sometimes girls are better at and sometimes boys are better at. So that
yeah,
definitely does seem to be kind of a universal thing, where there are girls who end up making games that are uh, mostly played by them, and then there are games that are mostly played by boys. But yeah, I think this has been a really fun episode.
yeah.
I
I
don't want to
enjoyed
keep you for too long because I know you have other commitments today. Um, and yeah, so let's do the wrap up. So this has been Byte Marx. Thank you everyone for listening to this wonderful episode about Squid Game. Do let us know if you would like to maybe get a follow up. There's still plenty that we could talk about. Plenty of the characters that we haven't touched on. Plot beats and so on and so forth. You can follow our socials. Our social media is all linked in the description of this video. If you have some spare money, you're more than welcome to throw us $1 or so on Patreon. And yeah, this has been Byte Marks. Chad, you're welcome to shout out anything that you like.
Oh man, just thanks for having me. This is always so much fun. Start inviting me on more podcasts, Emilio. I am having a ball. Let's do this more often.
Yeah,
Thanks so much for listening.
I would love to. I would love to do a podcast with you more often. I think it's definitely you're a fun guest to have on, and you also are unique in the sense that you know both South African and like a bit of a foreign culture. So we can
Yeah,
have those kinds of conversations that maybe I couldn't have with someone else.
let's do it.
Yeah, so that would be cool. Yeah, this has been Byte Marks. We hope you guys have a lovely day. Wear your masks, take your vaccines, and yeah, take care, everyone. Bye.